warm and humid for those trying to sleep. So we start Saturday on a fairly cloudy note across the central slice of the UK into Wales and central England as well. And through the day, an increasing chance of some showery rain developing. To the north of it, fresher with some sunshine, still hot in the southeast though. Gradually turning unsettled for all areas as we head into the weekend, with outbreaks of rain clearing to fresher conditions for all.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, hello there on this balmy Thursday. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, the Transport Secretary says train strikes next week will drive passengers away and threaten rail workers' jobs rather than protect them. Grant Shapps delivered a speech earlier setting out the government's vision to create what he calls a reformed and modernised railway. The thoughts of travel commentator Paul Charles and Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens in the next few minutes. Scientists are warning that many of the vapes used in Britain are specifically targeted at children and contain dangerous chemicals. A report also suggesting the majority of vapes contain more nicotine than they ought to. I'll be joined by one of the tobacco firms which wants vaping rules to be tightened before 4:30. And Welsh tourism bosses say the country needs a rebrand to make it more attractive to the UK and international tourists. The Welsh Affairs Committee heard this week that the country needs to get away from sheep, wet weather and rugby. I'll be joined by two people who are extremely proud to call themselves Welsh. And with me for the next 2 hours, editor of The Conservative Woman, Cathy Gingell. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. The top stories on GB News. Downing Street says Boris Johnson might not replace his ethics advisor and is carefully reviewing the vital, important role after Lord Geit's surprise resignation yesterday. That's after the government published the ethics aide's resignation letter and the Prime Minister's response. In his letter, Lord Geit says, "I was tasked to offer a view about the government's intention to consider measures which risk a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. This request has placed me in an impossible and odious position." The idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code is an affront. "I can have no part in this," he says. Then, in response, Boris Johnson says He'd been seeking Lord Geit's advice in the national interest in protecting a crucial industry. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. Well, the Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry says it's clear there's an issue at Downing Street.
To lose one advisor on ethics may be seen to be unfortunate, but to lose two shows that there is something really rotten at the heart of Downing Street. You know, we don't need a new ethics advisor. What we need is a new Prime Minister.
Well, in other news today, the Bank of England has increased interest rates to its highest level in 13 years. It's been set at 1.25%. That's up from 1%. And it's the 5th consecutive hike as the Bank of England tries to control inflation. Last month, the central bank warned it would peak above 10% in the autumn, putting additional pressure on household budgets. The Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the United States after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyer told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. Mr Spacey will next appear at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. The General Secretary of the RMT Union has accused the Transport Secretary of disgraceful threats to rail workers' livelihoods and their right to strike. Mick Lynch says Grant Shapps should stop focusing on his own political ambitions and help reach a negotiated settlement on the dispute over jobs and pay. His comments follow Mr Shapps calling next week's industrial action an incredible act of self-harm. Rail workers are staging a 3-day walkout on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June. Tenants are to be given more powers to challenge poor practices and unjustified rent increases by their landlords as part of the government's new deal for private renters in England. The publication of a new government white paper today will also end blanket bans on families with children and those on benefits. The measures will form part of the Renters Reform Bill, which aims to redress the balance between landlords and privately renting households across England. Freddie Poser, director of Priced Out, says there needs to be more building of homes across the country. Specialist rape courts are being set up as part of a trial in England to try to improve conviction rates for sexual offences. The government says court staff and police will receive specialist training. Advisors will also be on hand for victims. The pilot scheme will be rolled out in Leeds, Newcastle and Snaresbrook Crown Courts, each with a dedicated courtroom for dealing with rape cases. The Prime Minister's official spokesman says continued crossings of the English Channel in small boats has shown the need for the Rwanda policy. It's as the Ministry of Defence confirmed 233 people reached the coast of Kent on half a dozen small boats yesterday. Almost 50 people have already been picked up in the Channel by a Border Force ship today. And lastly, archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover in Buckinghamshire is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object embedded in its spine, which experts believe may have contributed to their death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including items of jewellery, brooches, amber beads and even knives. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now it's time for Brazier.
Seven minutes past 4, the Transport Secretary says the planned rail strike next week will drive passengers away and risk workers' jobs rather than preserve them. Half of Britain's rail lines will be closed, at least during strikes by the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union on the 21st, the 23rd and the 25th of June. Of course, the days between will also be heavily disrupted. During a speech at a train depot in North London this morning, Grant Shapps had this message.
He'll directly to rail workers, who I think are less militant than their union leaders. Don't risk striking. Don't risk the industry and your future. Don't risk striking yourself out of a job. Don't pitch yourself against the public. Let's fix this station and get back to building a better railway.
Well, Grant Shapps, they're trying to go over the heads of the unions and talk directly to the workers. And the Transport Secretary also said the government's planning to introduce a range of options to respond to future industrial action, including the use of agency workers through legislation on transferable skills. Let's speak to travel commentator and the CEO of the PC agency, Paul Charles, regular contributor here. Hi to you, Paul.
Good afternoon.
How bad will it be next week?
I think it's going to be pretty bad. And in fact, the effects of it are already taking place because people are deciding to work from home instead of travelling and risk travelling into work and not getting there. You're seeing events cancelled. You're seeing people panicking about events that are planned and how they're going to get to them. So the damage is already being done. And I hate to say it, but I think it's very unlikely the plans will change next week. This action will be going ahead.
Grant Shapps made a point. I mean, it's not an original point, but it struck me that it's not just the case that the rail industry is in competition with the car. That was always the trade-off. It's a train or the car. He says now the railways are in competition with Teams and Zoom and Skype.
Yes, I completely agree with that, actually. I think that we've changed everything. Our habits of working have changed since the pandemic, the way businesses work, the way that bosses, such as myself, look after their staff and let them work from home more and more remote working. And actually, the unions in the rail industry have to adapt too. And there's no sense in this dispute that the unions, the RMT in particular, are looking to change their methods and their ways. So on the one hand, I think the Transport Secretary is right to be saying, look here, workers, look here, members of the union, I'm appealing to you because I think you can change yourselves. But he is dialing up the rhetoric to an extent which is only going to annoy the unions further. And I can assure you, having worked with unions on negotiations in the past, when I was working at Eurostar in particular, the unions are not going to back down very easily at all. They will announce more dates after next week's strike. I don't think they're going to back down in terms of the rates they're looking for pay increases of 7-8%, particularly over the next 3 years. And this is going to be a protracted dispute. And when you dial up the rhetoric as a Transport Secretary and you say, we're going to bring in agency staff potentially, I don't think, I'm afraid, that's going to work. It doesn't help the unions to come to the table. And from a training point of view and a safety point of view, it's very difficult to do anyway, to bring in agency workers for a job that is all about safety.
Absolutely get that. Paul, I just wonder, though, on your point that you don't want to dial this up, I just wonder how you render the RMT any more militant than they currently are. In the space of 3 years, do you know how many times they balloted for strike action? Over 200 times. This is a union which will metaphorically cross the road for a strike.
Yes, they are a militant union. There's no doubt they're one of the most extreme, but that's arguably why they have been successful in their eyes. They have managed to bring management to the table on many occasions and maybe not get the pay increases they've sought, but they've certainly managed to reach a compromise. And whether you agree with their tactics or not, they cause damage to the economy, but they have been successful by continuing to reach members, to continuing to get their members to support them. And you only have to look at the turnouts in many of those ballots. And they're strong. They are very strong turnouts indeed. So their members are behind them. And I think you'll find they will strike hard next week. And then they'll reassess and work out if their members can afford, from a cost of living point of view, not to be getting their pay for several more days. But I think you'll find this does become a more protracted dispute.
Paul Charles, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we're also joined here in the studio by Peter Hitchens, columnist at the Mail on Sunday. He wrote a column in today's Daily Mail, actually, there it is, arguing the rail row is down to the government, successive governments, and not necessarily the unions. He's here in the studio to explain a bit more on what he's saying in that column. You do make the point, Peter, if you don't mind me saying, almost nostalgically, that back in the 70s, things were pretty good if you were commuting from Oxford to Paddington.
I mentioned there were many things that were better about the railways then. There's all kinds of silly lies told about British Railways when it was nationalised industries, which aren't true, and I recall how untrue they were from personal experience. It's quite amusing to see Grant Shapps, the Minister for E-Scooters, claiming that he's worried that the rail unions and their strikes will drive passengers away from the railways. The British government, particularly the Transport Department under its various names, which has always been a ministry for roads and cars, has been driving passengers away from the railways systematically, brutally, and at great cost since the 1960s, when they shut down large parts of the railways. Examine this with logic for a moment. What they said, on the advice of a rather stupid businessman called Richard Beechey, was that the smaller railway lines, which fed the bigger ones, didn't make a profit. Well, do you know what? Acacia Avenue doesn't make a profit, and the B4029 doesn't make a profit. That's not what they're there for. They're there to provide a transport system. And if you shut them down, people couldn't get from their homes to the big roads. That's what happened with the railways. What everyone has learned since 1963 is that railways are actually the most civilized, efficient, energy efficient, particularly form of transport, and the most environmental form of transport known to man, both in urban and rural transport. We were mad to close them, and we're mad to run them in the way that we have. The form of privatisation chosen, I'm against privatisation anyway, the form chosen in this country must have been chosen by someone in a delirium. You couldn't have found anything more guaranteed to make the railways work worse than they did before. I've been travelling on them all this time. They've been through an explosion of passengers. That's not because they were privatised. It's because people were forced by house prices into long-distance commuting.
And 10 million more people have moved here in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and the railways in this country need, above all, huge amounts of investment. What I propose is a Treaty of Clapham Junction between the government and the people and the railway unions, in which we rebuild all the railways we stupidly ripped up in the 60s. In return, the unions stop striking. But I always do find the sight of well-off middle-class people complaining that railway workers get well paid slightly distasteful.
Oh.
You've made Cathy
come in. Peter, you know, their average wage is about 44,000. That's well above if you look at the private sector, that's shrivelling now. I agree with you on the management of the railways has been appalling, but I think a union's holding the country to hostage now, and silly ministers ratcheting up the dialogue without doing anything. But these people have pensions. If you look at the vast size of the public sector and the control of the unions pushed us into lockdown. They took the most pro-lockdown position of all. Now they actually did get a small pay rise during that period, despite the fact loads of them weren't working and at home. So this is suicidal. I'm not saying the way Network Rail have run it is good, but this is still wrong to be held hostage like this.
I don't know about being held hostage. Look, this is the sort of language. I was an industrial correspondent in the great Thatcher years of constant conflict between unions, government and employers. And I learned from that there are indeed stupid, greedy trade union leaders, and also that there are responsible, intelligent ones. I also learned that there are incompetent managements who get themselves into wholly unnecessary confrontations by not negotiating. The other thing I learned, and you can see this now, people write about working in the warehouses of the great internet companies and the misery of it, not even being allowed to go to their lavatory, at incredibly long hours, treated like a serf. This is what happens when you don't have trade unions. No conservative person also can be against trade unions after seeing the huge importance of the freedom to withdraw labour in Poland in 1980. Every conservative person admires Lech Wałęsa and the shipyard strikes in Gdansk. That was an assertion of the freedom to withdraw labour, which is one of the essential freedoms of man. And I will not be against it. Anywhere, having seen that. And it's an important part of a free and civilised society. It can be abused. But quite why all the ire is directed... I've had far more disruption inflicted on my railway journeys by railway management than I ever had by any union. Over many, many years, almost every day there's something. On occasions, I'm actually... You're sitting on a train, you're ordered off it by shouting men.
Would you be prepared to pay higher taxes to pay for that nationalisation and the
Yes,
reversal of Beeching's Acts?
When you say that, I would love to see taxes diverted from the many stupid and useless things which they're currently spent on onto that purpose. I believe the reconstruction of a proper, not as stupid high-speed trains, but of proper medium-speed trains, connecting up all those market towns that had their stations removed, and the countryside. That would be a national resource worth spending tax on. I'd rejoice at seeing the money I hand over to the Treasury spent on that.
We're in a recession, and you can't just talk about middle-class people. Everybody uses the trains, not just middle-class people. And at this point of time, where we're heading for this huge economic crisis, actually, whatever government you had in power, however bad or good management is of Network Rail, or, this is sort of like so wrong, really, to take this country down into an even worse mess than it's in. I mean, of course, created by government, but very much helped by public sector, and very quickly. Yes, unions do abuse it. I was part of a very successful lockout of the unions at TVAM many moons ago when the greed was phenomenal, where we were being held to ransom on every bit of news footage we put out.
We've got other stories which we've got to get away, but if people want to read, Peter, your column,
I recommend reading it. I really do. It's not. We need railways in this country, and I don't. I think that if people are really going to be upset about their trains being disrupted, sure, be upset, but be upset at everybody who disrupts your trains, and that includes Grant Shapps, in my view, and many Conservative and Labour governments over the past 60 years.
Peter Hitchens, thanks very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says it was quite wrong for the European Court of Human Rights to exercise its power and intervene with the plan to take asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. The court has told ministers that flights could be grounded for around a year as legal challenges are processed. In response to reports today, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is now considering Britain's funding for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, should be reconsidered, the funding for that agency. Dominic Raab claims the ruling shouldn't have been legally binding, and he's promising changes.
I suppose it strengthens the case for a Bill of Rights, which I'm going to publish shortly, to replace the Human Rights Act and give us greater control over the interpretation of human rights, and in particular avoid Strasbourg applying what are tantamount to injunctions. And of course there's no power, there's no basis in the Convention for them to do so.
Let's turn to Ben Habib, who's a former Brexit Party MEP, joins us now with strong views on the Rwanda policy. Ben Habib, welcome to you. We talked about this earlier in the week. I think it's quite a significant development, this, from Priti Patel, saying we ought to look again at taxpayer funding. I think it runs to about £50 million a year for the UNHCR, which is actively involved, it seems to me, in seeking to thwart the democratic wishes of the British electorate when it comes to immigration policy.
It is, but I think we've got to be very careful, Colin, not to conflate issues. I think there's a real case to be made that we should, exit the European Convention of Human Rights and cut back funding to UNHCR. But that actually has very little to do with the Rwanda plan, which was utterly mad right from the beginning. And even if the ECHR hadn't intervened at the last second to prevent the plane from taking off, it would have only taken off with one or two deportees on it. In fact, the ECHR saved the taxpayer £400,000, I think, for that one flight, with the government having already paid, of course, $120 million to Rwanda. Now, the point about the Rwandan plan, and it's terrific that the government can now throw mud around and blame the ECHR and blame UNHCR. The problem with the Rwanda plan is that it was completely mad in the first place. It was never going to work. Anyone who gave it half a degree of scrutiny would have realized it was going to be fraught with legal challenges. It was extremely expensive. And that's before you even get any deportees to Rwanda and then have to face all the feedback of all the traumas and everything else that they inevitably would have experienced once they got there.
Ben Habib, it wasn't for want of trying or policies from this government. I mean, they looked into things like pushback and jet skis going to meet these little boats halfway out. The lawyers looked at it, said, forget it. First person who drowns, you'll have Border Force officials up in the courts on manslaughter charges. The French won't play ball. If they do play ball for a while, the complexion of the government changes there, it all falls apart. The only way we can take care of this ourselves is by outsourcing it to a third party.
No, the greatest respect, I completely agree the French are the problem here. But with the greatest respect, it's the French we need to challenge. I mean, look, think of the optics of this. They're coming across in their dinghies until they enter British waters. At that point, we pick them up. We're actually giving them a taxi service from the point of entry to British waters all the way to the coast. How is that consistent with a policy like Rwanda, which is designed apparently to deter them from
the
coming
problem
across
is,
the channel?
if you don't pick them up in international waters, you're in breach of international maritime law on rescuing people at sea in distress. That's the problem.
No, but they're not in distress, Colin, are they?
Well, they are when they throw themselves off the dinghy.
They've chosen to make that journey. What we've got to do two things. We've got to challenge the French very forcefully, and we've got to be prepared to man our borders much more aggressively. And unless we're prepared to do that, if we're going to give these people lifts in RNLI boats, give them lifts in border force boats, have border force unions, I know you were talking about unions before I came on, have border force unions challenging the government in the courts to prevent the Rwandan policy. If you're going to have all that sort of behavior, of course you're not going to deter these illegal migrants from coming across. We've got to develop a bit of stiff upper lip, and we've got to take the fight back to the French. And actually, it means chucking them a tow line and British ships taking these dinghies back into French waters and making them go back to France.
Ben Habib, we've got to leave it there, but absolutely fascinating as always. Thanks ever so much. Now, the Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey has been granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. Most of the alleged offences date back more than a decade. Our Home and Security editor Mark White is outside the Magistrates' Court in London with the latest on this. Mark.
Colin, yes, there was always going to be a huge amount of media interest with a Hollywood A-lister coming here to a London criminal court, and sure enough, when Kevin Spacey arrived here at Westminster Magistrates' Court, there were dozens of camera crews, photographers, reporters all around this actor as he tried to make his way into the court. He appeared in court number 1 here at Westminster Magistrates' Court for around half an hour to face 5 counts in total of sexual assault that are alleged to have taken place, the first in 2005 against a man in London. Those incidents, or that incident, relates to 2 counts that he faces. Then in 2008 he faces charges relating to another 2 sexual assaults against another man. And then in 2013, a third alleged victim has complained of sexual assault that took place in an incident in Gloucestershire. He did not enter a plea in the dock at this stage. His lawyer did indicate, though, that he would be fighting the allegations in court at a later date. Now, one of these charges that he faces is an indictable offence, in other words, a more serious offence, so it cannot be heard here at a magistrate's court. It's been bumped up now to the Crown Court, so Kevin Spacey will appear again at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White there. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, scientists warning that many of the vapes used in Britain are specifically targeted at children and contain dangerous chemicals. I'll be joined by a spokeswoman from one of the world's largest tobacco firms, which wants the law tightening. That's next.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're with GB News. The headlines: Downing Street says Boris Johnson might not replace his ethics advisor. Number 10 says the Prime Minister's carefully reviewing the vitally important role after Lord Geit's surprise resignation yesterday. The ethics aide says he quit after being placed in an impossible and odious position over a plan to risk breaking the ministerial code. In his resignation letter, he described it as an affront, saying he could have had no part in it. Also today, the Bank of England has increased interest rates from 1% to 1.25%. That's as the cost of living continues to soar. It's the fifth consecutive rise, pushing interest rates to the highest level in 13 years. Inflation is currently at a 40-year high, and the banks warned it could surpass 11% in October. As you've been hearing, the General Secretary of the RMT Union has accused the Transport Secretary of disgraceful threats to rail workers' livelihoods and their right to strike. Mick Lynch says Grant Shapps should stop focusing on his own political ambitions and instead help reach a negotiated settlement on the dispute over jobs and pay. His comments follow Mr Shapps calling next week's industrial action an incredible act of self-harm. And the Prime Minister's spokesperson says continued crossings of the English Channel in small boats shows the need for the government's Rwanda policy. That's as the MOD confirmed 233 people reached the coast of Kent on half a dozen small boats just yesterday. Almost 50 people have already been picked up in the Channel by a Border Force ship today. Those are the latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time to go back to Brazier.
Well, Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday really got you going on the subject of railways, and actually quite a few agreeing with him that renationalisation of the bits that haven't been nationalised might be part of the answer. Mike says, I used to totally agree with Peter Hitchens, but on the question of nationalised railways, I certainly don't. In the bad old days of state ownership, British Railways existed for its own employees. The travelling public were a necessary inconvenience, says Mike. The staff, from porters to senior managers, were basically useless, getting away with it as they were state owned. Keep your thoughts coming in and try and keep it polite if you possibly can. Now, scientists are warning that many of the vapes used in Britain are specifically targeted at children and young people and contain dangerous, sometimes dangerous chemicals. More than a fifth of products contain the banned substance diacetyl. It's a chemical which has been linked with a disease known as popcorn lung, although it's important to stress there's still not conclusive evidence to prove there is a direct link. Interestingly, the research also found that the majority of vapes contain more nicotine than they legally ought to. The research was commissioned by JTI, a global tobacco firm, which says its efforts to push smokers towards vaping are being undermined by unlawful, even dangerous vapes. Nikki Small is a spokesperson for JTI and is here in the studio with us. Nikki, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Cathy and I were just talking about the vapes and our children using them, and we think, well, that's all fine, that they're safe. Not all of them may be.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for having me in. That's true. Could I just address something in your opening just before we go on to that? You said that our company is pushing smokers towards vaping. That's not the position of JTI. We don't believe in dictating to the consumers what they should be consuming, but it's more about the choice. So we offer the full range of alternative products. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry, on disposable vapes, could you repeat?
That you are worried that there's illegal stuff out there that's actually dangerous?
No, there is. So we commissioned a report which was done by Broughton Life Sciences, and that tested 28 of the most popular products in the market, and we found that 25 were not compliant with the current regulations. So they either had too much nicotine content in them or too much fill volumes. There's a 2 millilitre limit on the disposable vapes. Most worryingly, some of them, as you said in your opening, have diacetyl, which is an ingredient that's banned in the UK and the EU and most commonly associated with popcorn lung.
And what's this thing about the nicotine content of some of the illegal vapes being way, way over what it ought to be? I mean, why does that even matter?
Well, it's the regulations, it's the law, and that's what we have in the UK. And if they're notified on the UK market to MHRA, they should adhere to those standards.
Yeah. Cathy, you were saying that you see vaping as a sort of...
Well, I definitely saw, and from the research I've sort of read, I haven't gone into it very much, I felt relieved that my grown-up adult son, the one who used to smoke vapes, I felt that it was much better. And in fact, the doctor said switched from smoking to vaping quite a long time ago when he was at uni. It does alarm me if there's too much nicotine, because we know nicotine is very addictive. So obviously there's a good reason to keep the nicotine levels down. I mean, obviously it doesn't go into the lung, but it's addictive in the brain. Yeah. So I don't know. I think this is alarming. What's happened to this trading standard officer? How's this all got out of hand, I want to ask?
Can I address the nicotine and the vaping side of things first? So we're specifically talking about disposable vapes here. They're very new on the market. They came into the market around June last year, and they've grown in popularity since that time. So specifically these products that we've commissioned the report on. Vaping has been an established category in the UK for a very long time, and Public Health England, as was, have said that vaping is 95% less harmful than smoking. So, you know, there is benefits to vaping. So we're specifically on disposable vapes here.
And what about, I mean, when they are disposable and you see these pop-up shops flogging these disposable vapes, and it's obvious very often these are not aimed at Cathy and I and you, Nikki. These are aimed at
young
kids.
Children. Yes, they are. And that's really concerning. Thank you for bringing that up. We see many products that have names that are attractive to children. For example, bubblegum, candy floss, you know, things on that nature. And they're brightly packaged as well. Many of them may take off brands that are well known with children. Like Sweet Names confectionery, well-known drinks brands as well, and energy. And that we also see them, and they're not just in traditional retail, they're across everywhere. And we've recently seen them in Oxford Street, for example. There are the large candy stores that you see down Oxford Street. And as you'll see from the video footage that's been on, they're on display in the window, and there's no place for those in a shop that sells candy as well, when they're clearly attracted to children.
Nikki, while we've got you, I wrote a monologue last week about the government's, or not the government's plan, a plan to increase the age at which you can buy tobacco in this country to 21. And I mean, I don't know what you think, Cathy, but I think it's an outrage that you can, at 16, have sex, get married, join the army at 17, 18, be voting at 18, buying booze at 18, but that we're in danger of saying to people you can't buy tobacco products until you're 21. I think it's grotesquely infantilising.
Yes.
From the industry, you don't speak for the entire industry, obviously you just speak for JTI, but what is your personal view on that?
As JTI, we completely agree. You know, the age as an adult in the UK is 18, and that should be the age that you are free to make your choices, whether that be getting married, joining the army, as you say, smoking, vaping, drinking, anything is that.
But of course, they want to legalise cannabis, so decriminalise cannabis, so you'll have all those good rules for those things, but you can have cannabis from 3 years old.
It seems particularly crackers
According to Sadiq
you can determine your own gender in your mid-teens, and you can't decide to smoke a tab until you're 21.
You certainly shouldn't be determining your own gender in your mid-teens, that's for sure.
But on the age of sale, we have to bear in mind that report is a report commissioned by the government for recommendations. It's not government policy, and it isn't yet. But there were some good things in that report. For example, around vaping, the report did recommend that there was a clampdown in regulation on the naming and flavouring and packaging of vaping products, so they're not aimed at children, which we fully support. The report could have gone a bit further on alternatives. I mean, freedom of choice in the UK. We also have two other smoking alternatives in the market. You can have heated tobacco products. We have our Plume brand and also nicotine pouches, and we have our Nordic Spirit brand. The report could have gone further on those to give choice to consumers.
OK, it's not something we talk about very often, but Nikki Small, thanks so much for coming in to tell us about it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming up, does Wales need a rebrand? That's what the country's tourism board has said. They say the Welsh need to get away from sheep, wet weather and rugby. Wet weather? When did you last see that in this country? Hottest day of the year today. They want to do that to encourage more visitors. Two people extremely proud of their country's heritage will be talking about that. We're back in a tick.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah. We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
This is GB News. You're with Colin Brazier on TV, online and on digital radio. Our top stories this afternoon at 20 to 5. UK interest rates have increased by 0.25% to 1.25%, pushing them to the highest level in 13 years. The groans you can hear there from Cathy Kinchell. We'll talk to her about it later. The Bank of England says it's attempting to stem the pace of soaring prices. The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, says it was wrong for the European Court of Human Rights to intervene with the plan to take asylum seekers from Britain to Rwanda. The Deputy Prime Minister said the flight's grounding strengthened the case for reforming human rights laws. And the American actor Kevin Spacey's been given unconditional bail after appearing in a London court on 4 charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. He was not asked to enter pleas for the alleged offences from 2005 to 2013. Are you one of those people who loves the pub or the idea of the pub without acting on that impulse very often? I'm afraid I am. I think the pub is a great British institution that frankly needs all the custom it can muster in order to survive. So tonight, as you fire up the garden barbecue and take a bottle of white wine from the kitchen fridge, a plea for the boozer. Historically, the pub's always had its critics, and they were often right. A working man who spent his wages at the bar, not on his family, was a wastrel. But the pub, properly used, not abused, was and remains a force for good. I remember the haunts of my youth, the Green Man, the Coach and Horses, the Lemon Tree. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, they dispensed not just ale, but the glue of community cohesion. And they provided something else, a firm look from a landlord or landlady. Was there enough to tell a young drinker they'd had enough? A well-run pub is a school for responsible consumption, teaching lessons that last a lifetime. Well, those pubs I mentioned, all closed now. It's been happening for years, but recently the number of pubs that call time for the last time has rocketed. During lockdown, 40 pubs a week were closing for good. Well, that might raise a cheer from the Temperance Society, but don't assume that people are actually drinking less, because pubs are shutting. During lockdown, when pubs were forced to close, drinking at home went through the roof. Perhaps you recognise this. It was often a different kind of, sometimes quite joyless drinking too, solitary, unsocial, antisocial even, often going on for longer than a session in the pub might have done. The epidemiologists who modelled lockdown failed to factor in so many unwelcome side effects. The spike in the consumption of booze at home was but one of them. In a country where 8 million Britons now live alone, do you know that 8 million Britons now live alone? The pub should be seen for what it is, not as a Victorian hellhole where parents drown their sorrows and forget to feed their kids, but as a haven for conversation, for chance encounters, and exposure to patrons from different walks of life with, oh yes, different points of view. Yesterday was National Beer Day. If you missed it, make amends today. Make the most of tonight's balmy weather and raise a glass in the beer garden of the Great British Pub. Cathy Gingell is alongside me today. Pubby or not?
Here, here. That's all I can say. That was great, Colin. Agree with every word. Oh, I'm pubby.
Fetch the drinks.
No, I'm definitely pubby. In the paper, they showed these amazing pubs with their old sort of Victorian and even earlier interior. And a few years ago, I drove miles across Dartmoor to track one of these places down. It's quite extraordinary. And you get that wonderful feeling of connecting you with the past. I think there's nothing better on a summer evening than to be in the garden of a nice pub. And, you know, you'll find tonight the London pubs are overflowing.
Oh, yeah.
They'll be overflowing.
Of
People
course
won't
they
be
will.
able to even get a drink. That's why they shouldn't have all closed down. I mean, they should have been, I don't know. It's very sad.
My favourite pub in the world, the Angel and White Horse in Tadcaster. For those of you maybe who've ever been to Tadcaster, they've still got the drays in the horses in the back that pull the cart with the beer around the town. Amazing.
It's one of my bucket list things to do, to go to the best ones in Britain before I die.
It's a fairly low bar for ambition. We can try and sort at least one of them out for you, Cathy. Thanks very much. It's time for our debate this hour. Not on beer, sadly. Tourism bosses in Wales suggesting the country needs a rebrand to attract more tourists. Sean Taylor, Director of Tourist Attraction Zip World, told the Welsh Affairs Committee that the country should get away from sheep, wet weather and rugby. He said Wales should instead promote its adventure tourism destinations, amazing food and drink and heritage sites. So we're asking, in the context of that advice from the man in charge of Zip World, does Wales need a rebrand? We're joined by two people who are extremely proud to be Welsh. Farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones and ice cream parlour owner Lauren Evans. Welcome to you both. Gareth, I know you're proud of being a Welsh farmer, you're proud of Wales. I have to say, for us to do this story today, of all days, strikes me as slightly odd. This is the day where a restaurant in Powys, in Machynlleth, was named the best British restaurant.
Yeah, brilliant. That's what it's about. And you know what, Colin? It's so important that we're sharing what we've got in Wales. And Sean Taylor is a really good friend of mine. And him, me, and Jim Jones and many others have been rebranding Wales for a long time. You know, North Wales is the adventure capital of Europe. We've got Zip World, we've got Bounce Below, we've got Surf Snowdonia, we've got the treetops. We've got everything here. And you know what? I do immersive tours. I bring Americans up here every week and to show them, them things running down the hill there, sheep. And it's so important that we are sharing everything that we've got here in Wales. The food, the drink, you know, we've got the Aberfalls gins, we've got the Penderyn whiskey, we've got the best food in Britain or maybe the world, especially lamb and beef. I'm sorry to say it. I don't want to upset anybody else, but we don't need a rebrand. We've rebranded it. You know, we're selling what we've got here. 64 tours we've booked on our farm. So sheep, And sometimes the wet weather help. You know, the Americans like to see a bit of rain because it's so dry for them over there. So it's a little bit of everything. Let's get the mix in there. You know, we're not rebranding. We're just selling what we've got.
They're not seeing any wet weather today, I don't think, anywhere in the British Isles. Lauren Evans, a rebrand.
Hello. Well, I think, personally, we should have a policy as diverse as our landscape within Wales. We've got lush rolling hills with livestock. We've got gorgeous blue flag beaches. We've got mountainous regions to explore, historical buildings to explore. So we should just, as Gareth said, if it's not broken, don't fix it. We are doing very well as a country to attract tourism and especially our produce. We produce incredible produce using local Welsh agricultural products. So let's just carry on doing what we're doing and let's do it well.
Gareth, you mentioned tourists from America. I know you've done some journalism for us and asked some tourists what they've taken away from their trip to your neck of the woods near St Snowdonia. Here it is.
That the strawberries and potatoes are the top notch.
We're living the dream. That we should buy more locally and sustainably grown food.
Yeah, and you look good in that hat, man.
I think so too. Thank you.
You're taking away my thunder.
Wow.
And that wool makes a wonderful fertilizer and sweater.
Not a day for a woolly sweater today, that's for sure. You can have both, Gareth, can't you? I mean, the Welsh love affair with rugby is well documented and a source of enormous pride. It's possible to be outward-looking, offer lots of attractions, and still love the things you've always loved.
Yeah, and I'd like to congratulate Jim Jones as well and Sean Taylor. They've done a great job here in North Wales. Go North Wales are doing a fantastic job. I'm disappointed with some of the stuff Visit Wales do. I'll be totally honest with you. You know, I do a lot of social media. That's the way I've built this immersive tourism business on the farm. And we've not had any help. They're even too lazy to retweet the stuff we're doing. You know, we need to have diverse ways so we can add value to what we've got on farms, on businesses. And tourism is a massive part of what we've got as an income coming into Wales. And it needs to be pushed, you know, from the castles to the beaches to the restaurants. Everybody that has come to Wales is going to spend money and it's going to help the economy. It's going to help the young people have jobs in the area. So, you know, it's a win-win. So let's get behind it. Let's push it ourselves and let's get Welsh Government understanding, you know, that they need to do their bit as well.
Lauren Evans, just on tourism, and I don't want to strike a downbeat note at all, but I was in Cornwall last month and somebody there was saying, you know, maybe it's coming out of COVID and people having holidayed in the UK. This summer, they're looking to spread their wings and go abroad. What are you seeing number-wise this summer so far?
Well, I'll be truthful. As a business, we're down 22% on last year's take-ins. Purely, we think that is to do with people going abroad, and the cost of living is rising. A fine example: a local family went to a local farm park with free parking. And it was closer to home because of the fuel prices and the cost of parking at our seaside towns. So it has affected us as a business. But nothing that I don't think we'll be able to bounce back from. And hopefully come the summer holidays, when holidays do get more expensive abroad, we should hopefully pick up. But no,
fingers crossed.
Fingers
crossed, Lauren. And this weekend's weather will not do any harm, will it? Lauren, Gareth, thanks both very much indeed. Two proud Welsh souls joining us there today. Cathy Gingell is alongside me. Interesting, I mean, on numbers being down this year, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but on one level it's obvious. It was always going to happen, wasn't it?
Well, I think cost of living is probably the worst. I mean, this is terrifying. There are fewer cars on the road. But what needs rebranding about Wales is not beautiful Wales or the beautiful farm or that wonderful lady. What needs rebranding is their politicians. I mean, they're net zero zealots. They're going to make it more difficult for tourists to park. They're going to do everything that will be hostile in a sort of net zero future Wales 40-year plan. So that's what they want to get rid of. They want to free up the country to be able to do that and actually get behind, you know, the people there, because fabulous. I mean, you know, you've been, haven't you? I mean, wonderful country.
It's a great country, wonderful country. It's time for 5 to 5. 5 things you might want to know before 5 o'clock. At 5, firms found guilty of dialing nuisance calls could face fines of up to £17.5 million if new plans get the go-ahead. The Data Reform Bill will see a crackdown on marketing calls and scams by phone, text or email. The Information Commission, the Office of the Information Commissioner, received 130,000 complaints last year about unwanted calls and messages, but only £2.8 million worth of fines issued. At 4 million of iPhone users, could you be one of them, could get payouts if a watchdog wins a court battle over claims that Apple deliberately slowed down the performance of its handsets. The Competition Appeal Tribunal alleges that Apple wanted to avoid expensive recalls or repairs. In a statement, Apple said they would never do anything to intentionally shorten the life of any product. At 3, favourite story of the day, this. Almost 2,000 jobs will be created in South Yorkshire after the company behind Airlander Airships, there you go, Airlander Airships, received its first commercial order. Hybrid air vehicles have been commissioned to build the airships, which stay aloft using helium and electricity. They seat 100 people. They've sold them to the Spanish. The deal is worth $600 million. Talking to the boss of that company very shortly. At 2, a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves has been found. Archaeologists working on a HS2 site did that. The site in Wendover, Buckinghamshire, is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. You see the metal shard there, found embedded in the spine. People wondering whether the two things may be connected, being dead and a shard of metal in the spine. Probably would be my guess. And at 1, AI, recreations using AI. The famous authors Jane Austen, as well as Winston Churchill and Oscar Wilde, have been taking part in a debate in Oxford. How do you do that when they're long dead? Well, students at the Oxford Union Debating Society heard avatars of those dead authors give views after the AI was trained to speak like each writer. The AI had looked at lots of their words. The Union believes it's the first time the concept had been deployed in a debate. Those are 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Cathy Gingell is alongside me here to tell me which of those stories, Cathy, if any, caught your ear.
Well, I suppose the airship, I mean, it's Back to the Future, isn't it? I mean, this was the first cross-Atlantic travel, wasn't it, back in the...
Not always successful,
Not
exactly.
always successful, but what, 30s, 40s? When was it, before the Second World War?
Interwar years.
Interwar years.
Before then, the R101.
So it's sort of rather wonderful, and it's sort of like an El Poirot film. I'm not quite a Poirot, but, you know, you can see. But then I think, although I love it when you have this entrepreneurship and creativity and it comes from this country, it's terribly exciting. But I think the idea that it might be our sort of transition through to a new era of air travel.
We never said that. But Cathy, you're a media watcher. These stories about the airships, they come along. They're a hardy perennial every other year. Yeah. Airships are going to revolutionise cargo travel, never happens. This time, somebody signed on the dotted line $600 million, 1,800 jobs. It's for real.
No, that's fantastic. But then it's got to live and die by its commercial viability, hasn't it? And, you know, when people find they can only travel, I don't know how many miles they can go, how far it'll take them, whether it'll actually reach Paris.
Ask him.
Oh,
we'll ask him. We've got the chief executive officer. We'll get us a trip.
How far can we
get us a trip on it. Cathy, thanks very much indeed. Much more news coming up. Stay with us.
Hello. For much of England and Wales, the fine weather looks set to continue as we head through the rest of the working week. Plenty of sunshine and probably the peak of the temperatures as we head into Friday. But it will be cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland with some rain heading in through the course of the day. If we look at the pressure pattern, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. That's what's brought all the fine weather over the last few days. But it is migrating its way eastwards, and as that happens, we drag in some very warm hot air from the south as we head into Friday. Through the rest of Thursday, then, into the evening and overnight, plenty of cloud across the UK, but most places will be dry with some clear spells. But it's a different story across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with heavier, persistent rain spreading in from the Atlantic as we head through the night. A strengthening breeze here as well, and it won't be a particularly warm night in the north, 12 to 14 degrees, but across England and Wales, another fairly warm, muggy night to come. Temperatures in places not dropping below 17 or 18 degrees Celsius. As we start Friday, then, for most of England and Wales, it's a dry start. Variable amounts of cloud, but that will break to give increasing amounts of sunshine, I think, through the day. Again, a different story for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here we see outbreaks of rain continue to slowly push its way southeastwards. Some of that rain again could be on the heavy side. To the north of that rain band, it will be a fairly cool afternoon to come. But look at these temperatures across England and Wales, widely into the high 20s or low 30s. In the southeast, we could see 33 or 34 degrees, which is fairly exceptional for this stage in June. So as we end the day on a bright, hot note for many areas, we pick up on that cloud and rain that will continue to sink its way southwards across into central parts of England and Wales. To the north of it, we're in the fresher air, so 1 or 2 showers, quite a breezy conditions across the far north as well. Here it will be comfortable for sleeping, but look at these temperatures in the southeast, not dropping below 19, possibly 20 degrees, which really will be very warm and humid for those trying to sleep. So we start Saturday on a fairly cloudy note across the central slice of the UK into Wales and central England as well. And through the day, an increasing chance of some showery rain developing. To the north of it, fresher with some sunshine, still hot in the southeast though. Gradually turning unsettled for all areas as we head into the weekend, with outbreaks of rain clearing to fresher conditions for all.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah. We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5. The Transport Secretary says train strikes next week will drive passengers away and threaten rail workers' jobs rather than preserve them. Grant Shapps delivered a speech earlier setting out the government's vision to create what he called a reformed and modernised railway. Does the announcement change anything ahead of strike action? I'll ask the union behind it and speak to the travel editor at The Independent, Simon Calder. Almost 2,000 jobs will, it's said, be created in South Yorkshire this year after a British airship manufacturer received its first commercial order. Hybrid air vehicles, says the airships, helium and electricity involved in keeping them aloft, commissioned to seat 100 people. Their chief executive officer joins me before 5:30. And landlords are to be prevented from evicting tenants in England without giving a reason under proposals published in a government white paper. The Renters Reform Bill will also end blanket bans on benefit claimants or families with children, and landlords must consider requests to allow pets. We'll ask, does this put landlords at risk of rogue tenants? Putting that one the other way around. Next, with me for the next hour, the editor of The Conservative Woman, Cathy Gingell. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Hello to you and the latest GB News headlines. Downing Street says Boris Johnson may not replace his ethics advisor after Lord Geidt unexpectedly quit. The government's now published his resignation letter and the Prime Minister's response as well. In Lord Geidt's letter, he says, "I was tasked to offer a view about the government's intention to consider measures which risked a deliberate and purposeful breach of the ministerial code. This request has placed me in an impossible and odious position." He goes on, the idea that a Prime Minister might to any degree be in the business of deliberately breaching his own code is an affront. And he says, "I can have no part in this." Well, in response to that letter, Boris Johnson says he'd been seeking Lord Geidt's advice in the national interest in protecting a crucial industry. Lord Geidt is the second ethics advisor to resign under the Prime Minister in 3 years. The Shadow Attorney-General, Emily Thornberry, says it's clear there is an issue at Downing Street.
To lose one advisor on ethics may be seen to be unfortunate, but to lose two shows that there is something really rotten at the heart of Downing Street. You know, we don't need a new ethics advisor. What we need is a new Prime Minister.
Well, in other news today, the Bank of England has increased the interest rate to its highest level in 13 years. It's been set at 1.25%. That's up from 1%. It's the fifth consecutive hike as the Bank of England tries to control inflation. Last month, the central bank warned it would peak above 10% in the autumn, putting additional pressure on household budgets. In news away from home, EU leaders have visited Ukraine the day before the European Commission's expected to back the country's bid to join the European Union. The German, French, Italian and Romanian leaders met with President Zelensky in Kyiv. They also toured bombed-out buildings in the city of Irpin nearby. The leaders are also likely to endorse Ukrainian membership of the EU at a summit next week. Downing Street insists the government isn't just standing by as rail strikes threaten to cause travel chaos across Britain next week. Officials say ministers remain close to the negotiations between rail bosses and union leaders. And that comes after the General Secretary of the RMT union, Mick Lynch, accused the Transport Secretary of focusing on his own political ambitions and issuing disgraceful threats to workers' rights to strike. Grant Shapps says the expected 3-day walkout by rail staff is an incredible act of self-harm and will put their jobs at risk. The Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the United States after being granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The 62-year-old faced 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. His lawyer told Westminster Magistrates Court his client strenuously denies all and any criminality. Mr Spacey will next appear at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. The Prime Minister's official spokesman says continued crossings of the English Channel in small boats has shown the need for the Rwanda policy. That comes as the MOD confirmed 233 people reached the coast of Kent on half a dozen small boats yesterday, and almost 50 people have already been picked up in the Channel by a Border Force ship today. Lastly, archaeologists working on an HS2 site have discovered a burial ground containing nearly 140 graves. The site in Wendover in Buckinghamshire is one of the largest Anglo-Saxon burial grounds ever uncovered in Britain. One skeleton was found with an iron object thought to be a spear embedded in his spine, which experts believe may have contributed to his death. Items from the 5th and 6th centuries were also found, including brooches, amber beads and knives. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Well, you probably don't want to start thinking about next week and how difficult it's going to be to get to work, get to school, travel around the country. You want to just enjoy today's fine weather. Well, let's think about next week. A warning to rail workers this afternoon from the Transport Secretary. Grant Shapps says the planned rail strike next week will drive passengers away and ultimately risk workers' jobs rather than preserve them. Half of Britain's rail lines, at least, will be closed during strikes by the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, the RMT, on the 21st, the 23rd and the 25th of June. Here's what the Transport Secretary had to say at a train depot earlier.
Appeal directly to rail workers, who I think are less militant than their union leaders. Don't risk striking. Don't risk the industry and your future. Don't risk striking yourself out of a job. Don't pitch yourself against the public. Let's fix this station and get back to building a better railway.
Well, the travel editor at The Independent, Simon Calder's here in the studio. Simon, this is a big test for Grant Shapps, isn't it? Because as you were telling us during the commercial, far more parts of the transport business are back in state ownership. So it's him versus the boss of the RMT in a way that wasn't always true.
Very much so. This is the first, obviously, big dispute that we've had in the railways for pretty much 3 decades. I think I'm the only person who can remember the late 80s, early 90s, when we had strikes on a pretty regular basis right across the network. Of course, since then, trains have been privatised and then unprivatised. So although you've got lots of private operators, and part of the RMT's argument is that they've taken £500 million worth of dividends out of the industry, in fact, everything is prescribed and controlled by the Department for Transport and paid for at enormous taxpayers' expense by the Treasury, i.e. by you and I, in our taxes. And so therefore it is, and the union know this, a straight fight between the unions and the government once again. And I kind of suspect, and you can ask the RMT about this, I kind of suspect that they're not unhappy having one foe who they know has very, very deep pockets. It's kind of familiar territory for them. And conversely, if I may, I think that quite possibly the government is not averse, as we saw in the Commons yesterday, with a debate which was basically saying, OK, line up here, Labour MPs, we're going to put on all our constituency notices the fact that you voted in favour of a rail strike effectively. And so they see it as actually quite a good sort of divisive issue in which they think they can prosper politically. So that's why, over the past few days, my odds, personal odds against the strike being called off have lengthened from 100 to 1 to 200 to 1, I'm afraid.
Well, which rather, previews my next question. How bad will it be?
Well, we are seeing, and I've been following up all the train operators today, what we're going to see is effectively, if you live in Wales, then you can go to Cardiff and you can go to Newport and you can go on some of the Valley lines and you can go into England. That's it. If you live in Scotland and you want to go further north than Falkirk, which is sort of halfway between Glasgow and Edinburgh, you're not going on a train. And nothing north, nothing west in Scotland. In England, you've got a higher proportion of the lines running, but for instance, nothing in Cornwall, nothing in Dorset. Both fantastic counties which people would be looking forward to going to on their holidays. And then there's some great cities which are just not connected. So Aberdeen, Swansea, Chester, no trains at all. There will be trains. It would be really good if you happen to live around London. You're going to see actually quite a lot of trains running, but only between 7:30 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening. And then all the main lines, so Brighton, Southampton, Bristol, Manchester and Birmingham, up to Leicester and Sheffield, and the East Coast main line as far as Scotland.
And Simon, those strikes in the late 1980s that you talk about, I mean, then I'm guessing, and Cathy will know more about this perhaps than I do, that having your insights into the Conservative government of the day, I mean, nothing else.
He's always going on about my age.
To be absolutely clear. But in the late 1980s, Simon, there was a trade-off, wasn't there? It was the railways or the car, and the Thatcher government was seen as very much as advocating for the motor car. Grant Shapps today said it's not that simple anymore. It's the railways and the car, yes, but it's also really the railways versus Zoom Teams and Skype. Is it that simple?
Well, it's most certainly a much more challenging environment for railways to prosper. And we've seen actually today the figures from the Office of Rail and Road. Yes, there was a recovery last year, but season ticket revenues have fallen off a cliff. They are just, it's catastrophic. Previously, you could say that the railways have generally taken £11 billion a year. We're down to about half that. And obviously, over the past year, it's been pretty strange. But it used to be people commuting from Woking and Stevenage and Basildon underpinned the whole thing because you knew, well, that's £5 billion in the bank every year, no problem. And of course, they're not doing that.
Kathy.
It's economic suicide all round because people can't actually afford to travel to work. If people work from home, they won't really work. We know that it's much less productive. There's a whole load of work you can't do from home. So it's like everybody's grinding themselves down into sort of total economic, not just economic recession, but a sort of form of social economic suicide. It's astonishing that this is happening, but it's very clear before that the prices of rail tickets were far too high for the average person. And then on top of that, now fuel prices, £100 to fill up your tank. So everybody's in a sort of like, it's like a gridlock. But is Grant Shapps capable? Is this Conservative government capable of living up to their tough words? If this strike's going to go on as long as you say, well, they might as well lock out the unions.
Well, right, OK.
I mean, well, if it's going to go on, what's the difference between having a very limited service and a limited service that you begin to run?
Well, I think what we will see on Thursday, which will be the second day of the strike, could well be very different from what we see on Tuesday. So we're going to see 22.5% of all the trains that normally run on a weekday running on Tuesday. By the way, if you're travelling anywhere next week, Monday's a really good day to do it because you should get a completely normal service. It's going to be impacted on the intervening Wednesday and Friday and also on the following Sunday. But I think once we have first contact between, we haven't had a national rail strike for 3 decades. Once we have first contact and it's clear, maybe there's a pocket of people here who've actually decided not to strike. Maybe the stand-in signallers aren't up to the job. We'll find out all kinds of things. And therefore, I think the pattern could be very different. And that will inform how the dispute goes on from there. But frankly, I mean, Mick Lynch saying his aim is to shut down the rail network completely. I mean, he's talking short term. However, there is a danger that it could be a long-term thing because obviously this is exactly when you want the railways to be at their absolute best, trying to attract people back, leisure travellers, people who would be making business trips in their car, getting them on the trains. But they're not going to do that all summer long if we think that the whole thing's going to grind to a halt.
Simon Calder, thanks for coming and appreciate it. Thanks very much. Moving on, different story. The Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says it was quite wrong for the European Court of Human Rights to exercise its power and intervene with the plan to take asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. The court has told ministers that flights could be grounded for around a year as legal challenge. A year? As legal challenges are processed, but in response, reports the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, is now considering Britain's funding for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Let's turn to the Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, who joins us now. And Stephen, it's worth pointing out, is a former barrister, so a lot of the legal complexities to him are familiar. Stephen, welcome to you. Can we start with this point about the UNHCR? You may know, I'm sure you know more than me, but I think we, as British taxpayers, give the UNHCR, UN agency, about 50 million quid a year. And for some people, that's going to stick in their craw today because the UNHCR have been one of the, not the decisive voice, but they've been one of the many voices raised against government policy, and they've helped drive through some of the legal activity as well. You can understand why Priti Patel says, why on earth are we funding you?
Absolutely, but they're not just the only ones. We also know now that the charities too are receiving masses of funding from both national government and from your local authorities. And I think the British public are getting really fed up with it. Of course, it's important to recognise that there are really major issues about asylum and migration across the globe. And the purpose of funding the UNHCR was to enable them to be able to alleviate the poverty and pain that those people are going through. What it didn't expect was for them to turn on one of its own members and use the funding that they provide to prevent them having a proper immigration policy that's been approved by the High Courts and our own Supreme Court. And that is why this is entirely wrong that the UNHCR should have involved itself, and why it's entirely right that Priti Patel now should be considering how we fund that organisation from our own taxpayers.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, do you think it tells us something about the microclimate, the cultural microclimate, that people in this sector work within, that somebody, presumably pretty high up at the UNHCR, thought this was okay?
It is very clear that there is an immigration industry, and that their key focus and their key strategy is to allow as many migrants, wherever they are and for whatever reason, to enter into those Western countries of America, Canada, the United Kingdom, the European nations that we're seeing large numbers enter. And they do not want any government, whether it's been elected on a mandate or not, to be able to prevent them from allowing that project to continue. And what we can see here is, on the one hand, you have the UNHCR providing funding to lawyers to attack the policy in our own courts. But we also have an unnamed judge issuing an Article 8 injunction in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, undertaking the same thing. It's not inconceivable to understand that all of these people meet together in the vast number of conferences that go on across this world, trying to develop policies to thwart governments that are seeking to have controlled borders.
Stephen, the frustration that some people will have, and I think of a guest I interviewed yesterday who lives near Dungeness, and she walks her dog on the beach there, and she regularly comes across boats disgorging migrants who are landing, sometimes escorted, other times meeting vehicles that cart them off. And she says there's almost a sense of entitlement when you see them. Sometimes she tries to talk to them. And she's appalled by what's happening. She wasn't some sort of knuckle-dragging demagogue. She was an ordinary member of the public who sees around discord and can't believe quite what's happening. Now, she knows that, I forget how many migrants have landed today. Yesterday it was 200 plus, wasn't it? 400 the day before that. We're way beyond 10,000 for the year. The numbers are doubling, if not tripling, every year. The point about this legal action was it put people like our guests from Dungeness back in the headlines. This was back on the agenda as a political topic. It'll go away now.
No, I think this is going to remain itself as a really strident and important issue. People are seeing the numbers increase. They're seeing them coming into their communities. And for them, it has a real impact. And at times when they're incredibly struggling to pay their own gas bills and electricity bills, fund food, and we see food banks rising, they're going to ask the question of why is the government not really succeeding in this policy? And why do they feel that the government is just not capable of being able to push this through? Now, the government has to face it, and I spoke to a number of MPs yesterday. I spoke to people involved in the Home Office. They're fully aware now that they're on a huge fight on their hands, and that they need to have a really important strategy to remove ourselves from the Human Rights Act here in this country, then to remove ourselves from the European Court of Human Rights. And we already see the fight back from what I call the professional, managerial, political left-wing class of London in particular, who are trying to say, well, why don't we blend our own Bill of Rights, Mr. Raab, and allow ourselves to have some control by the ECHR? The British public are not going to accept that. They know that these laws, undertaken by a foreign court, under our own agreements, need to go so that we can enact these policies. Otherwise, I think they're just going to vote with their feet and either not turn up at the elections or allow the Labour Party in.
Stephen Wolfe, as ever. Stephen, thanks very much indeed. Cathy Gingell is my studio guest for the show today. Cathy.
Well, it's ridiculous. It's a sort of circular thing. We're a magnet because of our very generous welfare benefits. We're a magnet because we're escorting them across the channel. We're a magnet because they don't ever get deported. So we're basically building and creating demand all the time. And the shocking thing is about the whole human rights law culture, and there are chambers devoted to human rights, as you know, across the legal area of London, is that these people are actually benefiting from they're thriving off a criminal trafficking industry. And it really is quite shocking.
Of course, they would deny that and
they're
say...
They're called human rights lawyers, but each individual case they take up, wrecks the project, basically, as we've seen with Miranda. It finally trickled down to 7 people. And it's a farce. It is indeed a farce.
Do you have sympathy for Priti Patel in this sense, that she knows that this was always going to run into trouble with the human rights lawyers, but there are people in her own department at the Home Office who are briefing the papers saying this is a cruel policy?
I do have sympathy with her, but I think this has been a long time coming. I'm quite closely in touch with a migration watch run by Al Mehmet, who you probably speak to. But these boat crossings, we began warning of the first ones way back before lockdown. And it has multiplied and it's multiplied, and systematically we've never done. The European Court of Human Rights has had a bad record with stopping deportations from this country anyway. It's a rotten, lousy institution that doesn't run like our legal system, with judges who are closely associated with NGOs and migrant, open society migrant projects. So, you know, it finally, the public knows that will pressure Priti Patel into being even stronger, I hope, because I don't think the public are going to be happy now they really see the pictures and see what's happening.
Cathy, thanks very much indeed. The Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey has been granted unconditional bail over charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. Most of the alleged offences date back more than a decade. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has been following events at Westminster Magistrates Court today.
Move to the side. The appearance of a Hollywood A-lister was always going to attract huge media attention. And sure enough, court security had to push their way through dozens of photographers and camera crews as Kevin Spacey arrived at Westminster Magistrates Court. The 2-time Oscar-winning actor flew in from the US to answer the charges that he sexually assaulted 3 men in separate incidents. The allegations relate to a period between 2005 and 2013, when Spacey was the artistic director at the Old Vic Theatre in central London. The court heard he faces 2 sexual assault charges alleged to have taken place in 2005 in London against a man now aged in his 40s. The second alleged incident, a further 2 counts, relate to a man now aged in his 30s, allegations of sexual assaults at an address in London. The third incident alleged against the Hollywood actor, a single count of sexual assault, relates to a man also now in his 30s, and according to the prosecution, the alleged offence took place in Gloucestershire in 2013. In a half-hour hearing in court number 1 here at Westminster Magistrates Court, Kevin Spacey spoke only to confirm his name as Kevin Spacey Fowler, his date of birth and his address here in London. He was then granted unconditional bail by the judge. Kevin Spacey's lawyers indicated his client would fight the allegations in court. He'll appear next at Southwark Crown Court on the 14th of July. Mark White, GB News, Westminster Magistrates Court.
Coming up, almost 2,000 jobs will be, it's hoped, created in South Yorkshire this year after a British airship manufacturer received its first commercial order. It was worth a few bob. We'll speak to the CEO next. Back in a minute.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah. We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV and on radio. It's hoped almost 2,000 jobs will be created in South Yorkshire after a British company developing airships received its first commercial order. The airships, staying aloft using helium and electricity, have been commissioned to seat 100 people. The company concerned Hybrid Air Vehicles, which developed Airlander at Cardington Airfield in Bedfordshire, is expected to begin manufacturing in South Yorkshire. We're joined by the CEO of Hybrid Air Vehicles, who's Tom Grundy. Tom Grundy, welcome to you and congratulations. It's one of those stories that you open up a Sunday newspaper every year or two and you see the future of travel will be helium, it'll be airships, and it'll be led by British technology, and then it sort of goes away a bit. But this sounds like, dotted line, $600 million.
Yeah, it's a really big step, as you say. There's a lot of time behind us developing this sort of technology. So to reach the point where we can expect to see fleets of 10 aircraft and more flying hundreds of people around the world with very, very low emissions, it is a real transformative point for the work that we've been doing.
Am I right in saying the deal's with IAG, the parent company of British Airways, so a big player?
It's actually with a company called Air Nostrum Group. So Air Nostrum Group fly aircraft in and around Spain, principally. They are affiliated with the One World Alliance, and some of their flights carry the Iberia brand. OK, so there's a very tenuous connection, I suppose, I'm trying to make with British Airways. And what will they be doing from Spain? So Airlander is all about letting people travel in a really different way. So think of a very comfortable, very spacious cabin, a bit more like being in the lounge rather than being in the aeroplanes that we're used to. It's quiet, you can see out of big windows, you can work on board. And it also enables people to go point to point. So we don't have to go directly from today's airport to today's airports. So we can open up new routes, get people in and around regions more directly, more efficiently, and critically, the airplane does it with 90% less emissions. So that's 90% less CO2 per passenger journey, which is obviously something that gives huge benefit for aviation's fight against climate change. And Tom Grundy, do you know what Air Nostrum are planning on doing? Will it be sort of charter flights? As you say, you don't have to fly from airport to airport. You can choose field over here, industrial estate over there. You know, whatever the 2 points are. Or will it be scheduled service? Will it be freight, people, tourism? Any idea? So these aircraft are for passenger transport, and what we see around us, about half of the flights that happen with regional jets, 100-seat regional jets in Europe, they're actually less than 400 kilometres long. So half of our flights, so we're using regional jets, flying really fast, yes, but then connecting through an airport where a lot of the connections and a lot of that journey experience is really quite slow. So what we're doing with Airlander is offering and what Air Nostrum will be doing is offering those same sort of services, those 100-seat transport from place to place, but doing that with a completely different aircraft. And in doing that, obviously providing something that's that much more environmentally friendly. And the other thing is its cost is equivalent to the travellers. You've got that nice environment, but you've got an affordable trip as well. It's that combination that makes it a really compelling replacement or addition to the regional jet fleets as aviation grows in coming years.
Yeah, affordable, and as you say, when it comes to the speed question, obviously this is not going as quick as a jet, but the offloading and the bits at the other end may make a difference. How quickly do they go?
Well, they do. Those things do make a difference. So if you think about how we get on board an aeroplane compared to how we get on board a train, for example, we can walk down to the train station and get on board with minimal checks and get on board and do our journey. So with Airlander, that's really what we're looking at here. It's a similar travel experience to getting on a ferry or getting on a railway, rather than the experience that we all have of going through the gates, getting to the airport, and all that entails. The flight part is 130 kilometres an hour, so still moving quite fast when you're in the air.
Yeah.
And the critical piece that we've looked at with Air Nostrum and the other customers that we're picking this up is obviously we're working to give a practical and economic journey that's equivalent to the customer to what they have today, but in a much more comfortable and environmentally friendly manner.
And Tom, when you do the focus groups, how much does safety come up, and how do you assuage any misgivings people have about that?
Yeah, so it comes up all the time in every part of aerospace. Myself, my family, everybody that I know, they'll all go on board these flights. So we develop Airlander, and we're regulated in exactly the same way as the rest of commercial aviation. So safety is right at the heart of everything that we do with the technology. There's some really unique parts of our technology that make it different from the airships that have been developed over the years. That's really key to how we've reached points like this, where we've got airlines stepping in and moving their fleets towards this new kind of technology.
Tom Grundy, it's a great British news story. Thanks for talking about it. Really appreciate it, and congratulations. Kathy Ginshaw is alongside me. Would you go on one?
Well, I don't know. Somebody paid me to go on it. I don't think I'd be scared, but I
paid me to go
well,
on it.
I know.
Hardly a ringing endorsement.
Well, I don't know. I mean, where's it going to land? How far am I going to travel out to a field in the country to climb on one of these? That's the only thing. He didn't exactly say. If you live in central Manchester or central Edinburgh, Glasgow or Birmingham or something, where are these things going to... Do they drop down or do they skid along a runway? I haven't quite got it yet. I'm sorry.
We'll get you his number. You can ask those questions. Kathy Ginshaw, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, are planned changes to the rental sector a good decision? Landlords are to be prevented from evicting tenants in England without giving a reason under proposals published in a government white paper. We'll debate that. First, the latest news headlines.
Colin, thank you. The top stories on GB News. Downing Street says Boris Johnson doing the role after Lord Geit's surprise resignation. Lord Geit says he quit after being placed in an impossible and odious position over a plan to risk breaking the ministerial code. In his resignation letter, Lord Geit described it as an affront, saying he could have no part in it. Also today, the Bank of England has increased the interest rate to its highest level for 13 years. It's been set at 1.25%. That's up from 1%. And it's the fifth consecutive hike as the Bank of England tries to control inflation. Last month, the central bank warned inflation could peak above 10% in the autumn, putting additional pressure on household budgets. And the Oscar-winning actor Kevin Spacey can return to the United States after being granted unconditional bail. The 62-year-old, who's accused of sexually assaulting 3 men, wasn't asked to enter a plea. He's facing 4 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. He strenuously denies the allegations against him. The RMT union has accused the Transport Secretary of threatening rail workers' livelihoods and their right to strike. Mick Lynch says Grant Shapps should stop focusing on his own political ambitions and help settle the dispute over jobs and pay. That comes after Mr Shapps described next week's industrial action as an indescribable act of self-harm. Those are the latest news headlines. You're up to date on GB News, on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, and Colin Brazier is here in just a bit.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And a quick snapshot of today's markets for you. The pound is 1.232 to the dollar and 1.171 to the euro. The price of gold currently standing at £1,497.90 an ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News, Investments That Matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
it's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick.
Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It did.
Let's take you back to our top story. Warning to rail workers this afternoon from the Transport Secretary, that is Grant Shapps, gave a speech this morning which he said that the planned rail strike next week will drive passengers away and risk workers' jobs rather than preserve them. Half of Britain's rail lines, we think, nobody really knows for sure, will be closed during strikes by the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union, the RMT, on the 21st, the 23rd and the 25th of June. Though, of course, because trains will be stuck in the wrong places, effectively it's 5-6 days of disruption. And to some degree, at least, the person responsible is the General Secretary of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, Mick Lynch. Of course, Mick Lynch, your members have voted for this, so you're executing their orders. How bad will it be next week?
Well, there'll be a severe level of disruption. Members in Network Rail will be on strike in Scotland, Wales and England, all the way from the north of Scotland down to the tip of Cornwall. So there will be a lot of disruption, and they'll be joined by all of our members working in the train operating companies controlled by Grant Shapps through the Department of Transport. So it'll be a very effective action. We don't want that to happen. We want a settlement, and Grant Shapps holds the key to that. He has decided to cut funding both on London Underground and the National Railway Network by up to £4 billion. And he wants our members to bear the brunt of that. Thousands of jobs are under threat. He's saying he's threatening more jobs, but they're already under threat. They want mass redundancies. They want to slash our conditions. And most of our members haven't had a pay rise for 2 or 3 years.
What do you say to his argument, which runs the last national rail strike was in the late 1980s. Then it was presented to the public as a choice between using the railway or getting a new car, and the Thatcher government of the era was very much in favour of the car. You could argue it's still that choice, but there's a third leg to the stool, and Grant Shapps made the point this morning. He said it's not just a choice between the train and the car anymore. For many people, it's a choice between the train and Teams or the train and Zoom. By going on this strike and having a week of absolute travel chaos, you are going to be reminding lots of work-from-home people that actually the train's not really to be relied upon.
Well, we fully understand that, and we've got an agenda that, as a union, that wants a fully funded and efficient railway that plays its part in the economic and cultural infrastructure of this country, moving goods, services and people around. And we want to play a part in that. But what we can't have is an underfunded railway and a railway that is a race to the bottom in terms of our members' pay, their terms and conditions and mass unnecessary compulsory redundancies. If we can get an agreement on that there needs to be no compulsory redundancies, and we can preserve our conditions through negotiation, and we can get a decent pay rise, we don't have to have any of these disputes, and we can run a good service for the public. That's what railway workers want to do. But we won't be exploited, and we refuse to be made poorer, which is what the Tory government wants for many working class people. And that's what's happened across many sectors in this country over the last 12 years since Cameron and Osborne
why can't... Sorry, Mick Lynch, why can't we have a minimum service over the course of a week? I mean, for instance, you know, I can't be completely exceptional. I've got an 18-year-old next week, a 16-year-old, one's doing A-levels, one's doing GCSEs. I'm a widower. I work in London. They'll be stuck in the middle of nowhere near Salisbury where they're going to try and get to their exams. I suspect they'll really struggle to get a taxi on the day they need to get one to get to their exams. You tell me what I should do next week to get my girls to their exams on time.
Well, it's up to you to make your arrangements to get your personal interests sorted out. My job is to protect my members who pay their contributions to my union. What will I do if they make thousands of my people redundant for no good reason? What will I say to my members if we go into a third year where we've not achieved a pay rise with inflation rampant? My job is to protect the interests of the people that pay their subscriptions to our union, and that's what we're intending to do. We've been speaking to these companies for 2 years or more now.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, since COVID came in, they've had the intention of using COVID as an opportunity to slash through the working conditions and livelihoods of railway workers. It's exactly the agenda that the airport authorities and British Airways and other aviation companies have done at our airports. They've cut back on the conditions. Now they can't get people to work for them because the jobs are so poor, and we can't run our services. We've no intention of letting the railways go in that direction, but that is the intention of Grant Shapps and the Conservative parties, and they're using the railway companies to do that. So I've got a duty to defend our members, and that's what we're intent on doing. If we can't get an agreement, there'll have to be a strike action, and that's unfortunate. If we can get an agreement, we can call that strike action off and get on with running the railways.
Yeah, no, I think people will be sympathetic to a lot of that. They just don't understand why it's got to be the nuclear option, why there can't be a minimum service guarantee written into contracts. Mick Lynch, we appreciate you coming on. Thanks very much indeed for your time. It's time for our debate this hour. The government's planning the biggest reform to the private rental sector in 30 years, which will include a ban on no-fault evictions. The Renters Reform Bill will also require landlords to consider requests to allow pets, which the law would say cannot be reasonably refused. The housing charity Shelter praised the plans, but landlord associations have warned they could worsen the housing crisis. So we're asking, are the planned changes to the renting sector welcome? We're joined here in the studio by landlord and property expert Julie Ford and Angelica Malin, who is editor-in-chief of About Time magazine. Thanks for both coming in here into the studio, and you'll be relieved to know the air conditioning is now working. Thank goodness. Julie, you're not entirely happy with elements of this. You feel that the balance has swung away from protecting renters to almost demonising those who seek to rent out properties, let out properties.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the moment we have so much legislation in the private rented sector. I don't think we need more. What we really need is this reform to break it down a bit better so it's fairer for both sides, landlords and tenants. But I think this is really swinging to demonise landlords in a way, because they're taking away so much of the ability for landlords to be able to rent out their homes. They can't get their properties back as easily as they can at the moment. And I just think that sometimes when we're looking at changing the legislation, we need to look at how it's going to affect both sides and the knock-on effect of that as well.
Well, one knock-on effect, presumably, Angelica, will be that if somebody who's currently letting their house, and we know interest rates are going up, there's lots of reasons why at any moment you think, do you know what, this rental game, it's not really working for me financially. Now they want me to have pets. I don't want pets in the house, so I'm going to put it on the market and sell it. And therefore the housing stock, the rental stock, shrinks.
That could be an issue, but I think what this bill is really benefiting is helping more people who are unfairly evicted and making the whole market fairer and providing stability. And I think post-pandemic, with so much instability during that time, it's actually protecting renters, which is really important. And on the pet front, I mean, so many people got pets in lockdown, and then they're stuck if they're in a home perhaps that they are living in and they want to move, they want to rent somewhere else, they can't, because for the most part, it's very difficult to rent with pets. And pets are amazing, and we should be allowed to rent with them. with them.
Yeah, but the pets thing, Julie. I mean, I'm slightly nonplussed by it. I mean, if you've got a dog, can you expect an automatic right to find a property that allows the dog to live there? I mean, I'm a dog lover. I've got one, but I don't think people should automatically expect that pets should be accommodated.
I think it's just understanding why landlords say no. A lot of the time, it isn't to do with the pet itself. It's the worry of what damage that pet's going to cause. The fact that the deposit has now gone down to just 5 weeks' worth of rent. So if the tenant doesn't pay the last month's rent, they've only got a week's worth of rent to clear up any damage. So I think from a pet point of view, it's what else is that pet going to bring with it? What if your next tenant moving in is allergic to cats, the previous tenant had a cat, you've got to rip all the carpets up or something along those lines. That's what landlords are worried about. It's not the pet itself, it's again the knock-on effect of having that pet.
But in this scenario, the landlords aren't being forced to have a pet, it's just that they have to accept the request, which is very different. And it just might open up some more opportunities for people who have pets who want to move and rent somewhere to be able to. Because at the moment, if you have a pet, your options for renting are often very limited.
OK. Julie, it just feels like the balance of anecdotes when it comes to this area is shifting. Time was when all the anecdotes were running in one direction. All the landlords were dreadful. They were all, sort of Rackman-type schemes, and they were, playing the system and generally abusing their tenants. And now, for every one of those stories, it seems to me, maybe circles are moving, you hear a contrary story saying, actually, I had this property, it was right on the edge of whether it could actually make any money, and then I got the tenants from hell, they trashed the place, I couldn't get any money out of them, but nor could I get rid of them, I was in this legal morass. You're hearing both stories.
Absolutely. And obviously with lockdown, as you were saying, when the temporary legislation came in, landlords couldn't evict for a certain period as well. So tenants weren't paying their rents. Antisocial behaviour tenants were harder and harder to evict. At the moment, the legislation to evict an antisocial behaviour tenant is under a discretionary ground. So basically, when you get to court, it's up to the judge on the day to decide if eviction is reasonable. So if you don't have enough evidence or if you don't have witness statements or anything like that, sometimes that in itself will fail in court.
Yeah, Angelica, there's a balance to be struck, isn't there, between protecting renters but also protecting people who've, in some instances, these aren't people with great massive property portfolio. They've got maybe a little flat. It's their pension. They haven't got a pension, they've got a flat.
Well, I think the other side of this that we haven't discussed so much is there being greater transparency about landlords having to maintain the properties to a certain level, and I think that's really important to be aware of as well. In the UK, there's a high percentage of people who are living in unsafe properties and they're in danger, and there needs to be more responsibility on the landlord side to keep up the property to a certain level. And we're seeing lots of cases of people being booted out when they've mentioned this work needs to be done, or there's damp in the flat, and then they're just being evicted. So I think this can protect renters in that respect as well.
OK. Angelica, Julie, thanks both for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Now, do you have an iPhone? Well, pay attention if you have. iPhone users, they could be, dread journalistic phrase, could be eligible for hundreds of pounds in payouts if a consumer watchdog wins a court battle against the tech giant Apple. There's a campaigner at the heart of this, Justin Gutton, who used to work for Citizens Advice, has launched a £768 million claim alleging the company misled its iPhone users over an upgrade that slowed batteries down. Stay with us, it gets a bit technical, but there's some clarity coming. The models which may be affected range from the iPhone 6 to the iPhone 10. Apple's statement, part of it read thus: "We have never and would never do anything to intentionally shorten the life of any Apple product or degrade the user experience to drive customer upgrades." The technology and finance journalist Josh White has been following the case closely. He's here in the studio. Josh, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Hi.
Tell us about the upgrade to begin with.
Well, this whole thing sort of emerged it was January 2017. It was one of the, they come every now and again. Apple sends you an operating system upgrade. You say, yes, of course I want this. I want to keep my phone secure. But it turns out that what was in this piece of software was there was a tool in it that, it essentially degraded the performance of the phone.
It's alleged. I mean, clearly Apple dispute this, don't they?
Well, what Apple have said, they've acknowledged that the tool exists. They've acknowledged that it limits, shall we say, the battery performance of the phone. But they've said that the reason they've done this is as lithium-ion batteries age, they become less, they don't perform as well, and they can become dangerous.
Yeah.
And so so that's why they rolled this out.
Are we talking about a fractional reduction in battery performance here, Josh, or something that made a big difference that actually would have meant large numbers of people were saying goodbye to their iPhones sooner than they might have done?
It was what people have said is that it was quite a large reduction in performance. I mean, it's people have said for a long time that as phones get older and as we install these software updates, my phone gets so much slower. And essentially, this has been seen as one of the reasons, at least in Apple's case.
I mean, that's a very big number we're talking about here, admittedly divided up amongst goodness knows how many people.
Well, this is not the first such claim globally. Apple have been they've been taken to court and have settled before it's gone to court in a couple of US states. Some European jurisdictions have done the same. But this, I believe, is the biggest claim that has been brought for this piece of software.
And Josh, doesn't it feed into this view, this prejudice, I use the word advisedly, towards big tech, that that they posture, they have these grand slogans, but actually, I'm not saying there's any truth in this, I'm just saying there is a view at large that says, that a lot of people share, that actually they're just money-grubbing so-and-sos at the heart of it.
Well, I think that's why this has really taken the headlines today. It's maybe we can get a bit back from all the money we've given to Apple over the last however many years.
And if I just, whenever I get the thing saying it's time to upgrade, you think, well, okay. And sometimes you don't like it because it changes a familiar format on your screen. But you don't for a second think, by agreeing to the upgrade, it's going to slow down the... I don't know, Cathy, do you think twice?
No, I had to upgrade mine recently because it actually wouldn't do so. Well, we got banned by O2, and in order to get the private relay thing, I couldn't understand why I couldn't lift that. It wasn't anywhere on the phone. So I had to do the upgrade on my very slow phone, and the one that I'm recharging the battery the whole time. I had to do the upgrade to get the feature I needed in order to stop my website being banned from me looking at on my phone. So, I've been done. They've got me by the short and curlies both ways round, haven't they?
Josh, will Mr. Gutman win? I mean, it's in the courts, it's in the gift of the courts, but you've got a strong case.
One of the interesting parts of this, I think, which goes into what you just said, is that when this upgrade came through in January 2017, there was no explanation or even admission that this little bit of software that will limit your battery was included. Apple admitted it months later, forced to essentially, and then they started a battery upgrade program. But again, Justin Gutman has said that was nowhere near as well publicised as it should have been, so that essentially Apple is shirking its responsibility to consumers, and I do think there's something in that.
I wonder. We'll try and keep across this story if we possibly can.
How will consumers get their money back?
Well,
if you win.
The best thing about it is it's opt-out, so you don't have to do anything right now. He's representing every owner of those iPhone models.
Cathy, isn't it?
In Britain, once there's a result, then you'll be able to fill out a form.
50p windfall, or something like that. Josh Wright, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Michelle Dewberry's next on the hottest day of the year so far to reflect on what's going to be in her show. Michelle?
Oh, tell me about it, Colin. Do you know, I want one of those, those hats that have a built-in fan that just kind of fan you and give you a
baseball
nice breeze.
Cap.
Yeah, or I want a nice young man with a bit of paper. That'd do the same, but I digress. Anyway, coming up on my show tonight, got a packed show, actually. Want to talk about strikes, Colin. Is it really right, come on now, that these unions are allowed to almost bring an entire country to its halt? If it's not bin men, it's it's buses, trains, planes, you name it. Really? Should we be kind of at the mercy of unions to this extent? Also, if anyone watches my show regularly, they'll know that I'm passionate about the topic of vaccine side effects. Millions and millions of people, Colin, had the COVID vaccines very, very successfully, safely and well. That's brilliant. But for the people that have been adversely affected and in some cases have died because of those vaccines, why, oh why, are they still not being supported by the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme? I'll be looking at that. And also, Tom Hanks says in this day and age, he won't be able to play a gay character. Really? Isn't that what acting is? You're supposed to play someone that you're not. Well's gone mad.
Good question, Michelle. Thanks very much indeed. Michelle Dewberry up next. Very briefly, cover those emails, because the rail strikes next week have got you going. No question about that. Pete on the railways. Only rich people, Pete says, can afford to ride on the trains, and I pay for them through my taxes, and I object strongly. Here's a plan, says Pete. close the railways, sack all the layabouts and concrete the track and let the government take its foot off the car driver's throat. I've got 10 seconds left, so that's long enough to say thank you to Cathy Kingill for all her commentary today. Much appreciated, and welcome you to Michelle Dewberry, who's next. See you on Monday.
Hello. For much of England and Wales, the fine weather looks set to continue as we head through the rest of the working week. Plenty of sunshine and probably the peak of the temperatures as we head into Friday. But it will be cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland with some rain heading in through the course of the day. If we look at the pressure pattern, then you can see high pressure very much dominating across the UK. That's what's brought all the fine weather over the last few days. But it is migrating its way eastwards, and as that happens, we drag in some very warm hot air from the south as we head into Friday. Through the rest of Thursday then, into the evening and overnight, plenty of cloud across the UK, but most places will be dry with some clear spells. But it's a different story across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with heavier, persistent rain spreading in from the Atlantic as we head through the night. A strengthening breeze here as well, and it won't be a particularly warm night in the north, 12 to 14 degrees, but across England and Wales, another fairly warm, muggy night to come. Temperatures in places not dropping below 17 or 18 degrees Celsius. As we start Friday then, for most of England and Wales, it's a dry start. Variable amounts of cloud, but that will break to give increasing amounts of sunshine, I think, through the day. Again, a different story for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here we'll see outbreaks of rain continue to slowly push its way southeastwards. Some of that rain again could be on the heavy side. To the north of that rain band, it will be a fairly cool afternoon to come. But look at these temperatures across England and Wales, widely into the high 20s or low 30s. In the southeast, we could see 33 or 34 degrees, which is fairly exceptional for this stage in June. So as we end the day on a bright, hot note for many areas, we pick up on that cloud and rain that will continue to sink its way southwards across into central parts of England and Wales. To the north of it, we're in the fresher air, so 1 or 2 showers, quite a breezy conditions across the far north as well. Here it will be comfortable for sleeping, but look at these temperatures in the southeast, not dropping below 19, possibly 20 degrees, which really will be very warm and humid for those trying to sleep. So we start Saturday on a fairly cloudy note across the central slice of the UK into Wales and central England as well. And through the day, an increasing chance of some showery rain developing. To the north of it, fresher with some sunshine, still hot in the southeast though. Gradually turning unsettled for all areas as we head into the weekend, with outbreaks of rain clearing to fresher conditions for all.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.